Well, Pete, let's start off with the inner solar system as we usually do. And Mercury is a morning object now, and it's climbing away from the sun's glare quite rapidly on the 1st of November. At the start of the month, its magnitude plus 1.5 and rises some 70 minutes before the sun in the east-southeast location. So that's worth finding if you've got a clear enough horizon.
Yes, it is. It's about 4 degrees to the left of Mag 1.0 Spica on the 1st of November as well. And because the star and planet is going to be quite similar in brightness, it'll be quite easy to mistake the star for the planet. So watch out for that. But Mercury rapidly brightens to reach Mag minus zero point 0.4 on the 10th of November. That's the time when it reaches its greatest western elongation, when it'll be 19.1 degrees to the west of the sun. And on that date, it rises a decent 2 hours before the sun. That's not bad, is it?
No, it's not. So there is a good chance here that you can grab an observation of Mercury before we lose it again, because it moves quite rapidly. And by the 30th of November, actually, it will rise just 1 hour before the sun. So we've only got a short window to try and grab it, but it's worth doing if you can.
But it does get brighter, actually, at that point as well, doesn't it? It's about Mag minus 0.7 at the end of the month. So good opportunity for seeing Mercury this month, I think.
Yes, and an object you really can't mistake in the morning sky at the moment is the planet Venus. So it is now slowly getting closer to the sun, but it is going to remain quite prominent in our morning sky through most of November.
Yeah.
On the 1st of November, its magnitude minus 3.9 and rises 3.5 hours before the sun. And if you look at it through a telescope, it's quite gibbous now. It's 81% and much smaller than it was earlier in the year. It's only about 13 arc seconds across. But that's still enough. If you've got a 4-inch telescope, it'll show you any cloud markings that might be present. And of course, it'll show you the fates.
Yeah, and it's a tricky time with Venus, isn't it, when you start to look at it with a telescope at this point in its orbit, because it seems to take forever to gradually creep back towards the sun, because it's on the far side of its orbit, of course.
It is, and it's not going to pass through superior conjunction until March next year. So it's going to be at this high phase, small disk size for quite some time. But nonetheless, this is actually a time when Venus is observed the least. So we don't have a lot of observations of the planet during this time, so it is a well worth thing to do. Morning observations tend to be even less, well, Venus in the morning sky tends to be less observed than in the evening sky, and when it gets to these high phases, the planet people tend to not follow it as much. So it's worth doing because there is a gap in the coverage.
Yeah, and also I suppose if you haven't got a telescope, there are some good opportunities to see Venus in the morning sky with the moon. So on the 13th of November, we've got a 5% lit waning crescent moon, magnitude minus 0.6 Mercury and minus 3.9 Venus, all attractively grouped together. So that's something nice to look out for, actually.
Yeah, it's a nice little thing to watch out for. You don't need any specialist equipment to look at that. Okay, well, moving further out, Mars, Pete. Hasn't Mars been splendid? This has got to be one of the best oppositions for a long time. And your usual run of bad luck with Mars seems to be absent at the moment, although I may just have jinxed it for you. So it seems to be going quite well. So as we know, it was an opposition on the 13th of October. It's going to remain just as bright, really, for the rest of November, and a very decent size. It's 20 arc second disk on the 1st of November and shrinking to 15 arc seconds by the end of the month. But that's still a good size. You should see something on it with even a small telescope.
Yes, that's right. I mean, that's larger than Venus, isn't it?
It is,
so,
yeah.
Yeah, that's not a bad disk at all. It's an interesting planet. I've been watching people struggling with Mars. A lot of people who are newcomers to it are doing things which I recognised when I started out, actually, where you sort of look at it and you can't see anything at all. It just looks like a very bright pink blob with nothing on it. And it really takes a little while for your eye to tune into Mars to actually be able to see any detail on the planet.
It actually took me a decade of almost continual Mars observing whenever it was about, to be able to see
Crikey, I wasn't that slow.
Yeah, but you don't see anything anyway, so it doesn't matter. Your electronic eye does it for you all. But to see even you can see the main features like the Syrtis Major, Solis Lacus very easily. The thing that's really difficult is all the different streaks and shades and very faint spots, which are actually very subtle and take some time to say. And even the South Polar Cap, unless it's really large, is actually can be quite a difficult object to spot.
Yeah, it can.
It's summer in the southern hemisphere at the moment, and so the cap has shrunk right down. So even a large telescope, it's not a trivial thing to spot. So there's a lot of hard work that has to go into getting some good results out of Mars, but it is worth it.
It is worth it. And there's a lot of stuff which is quite subtle, isn't there? I mean, I remember we were having a private conversation about Mars with the southern polar cap, and the fact that the southern polar cap is actually offset from the rotational axis of the planet. So it sort of appears to wobble towards us and away from us, depending on the date.
That's right. It is quite subtle. It took me some time to realise that's how people determined that the polar caps weren't exactly over the Martian poles, because one side of Mars, the polar cap is much more closer towards us, and yet on the opposite side, it's much more turned away. You can only see much, sort of like a thin sliver. So there's all these little subtleties as well. We've got bright clouds that come and go. Fogs collect in the various basins, like the Hellas Basin. And of course, we are in dust storm season. So will we get a big global dust storm this year? It's hard to say, but Mars is slightly unpredictable. We may find in a couple of weeks a massive one blows up and Mars is reduced to a featureless orange disk. That would be rather disappointing, wouldn't it?
Yes, but it wouldn't be the first time that's happened. There's an 82% lit waxing gibbous moon just to the south of the planet on the 25th of November into the morning of the 26th of November. So if you haven't got any instruments to look at Mars with, it's worth getting up on that night and having a look at the moon very close to it, because that's quite striking, because Mars is going to be pretty bright. It gets to about magnitude minus 1.1 by the end of the month and starts the month off at minus 2.1. So there's quite a big drop. It's a 1 magnitude drop through November.
And that will be quite noticeable, especially something like Mars, because it's the colour. You do notice a brilliant red object in the sky is really quite noticeable.
Yeah.
And when it drops down, you remember when we had all this with Betelgeuse a year or so ago, whenever it was really noticeable when the orange star faded right down, and it'll be a similar thing with Mars, I think. It'll be quite obvious. Okay, well, the next planet out, Jupiter, and this is visible all evening to the west of south as darkness falls. We've had some interesting events happen on Jupiter. I don't know if you've been following this, Pete, but the North Tropical Zone, this is the zone under the North Equatorial Belt. So if you look at Jupiter through a telescope, you've got the two main bands. If North is at the bottom, then the North Temperate Belt is the next belt you see below one of the big primary belts around the equator. And the zone that contains that has just started producing these brilliant white storms. And the North Temperate Belt's been very, very difficult to see over the last few years. And what should happen now, quite rapidly, is that we'll start to see a load of darker material come back into the belt. And it's quite a dynamic event. It's quite exciting to watch. So I hope you've had more luck with it than me.
Jupiter's been tricky because of its low altitude. It really is a difficult planet. And of course, as we're getting into November, it and Saturn are going to be further over to the west as darkness creeps in. In fact, it's worth mentioning that Jupiter and Saturn are about 5 degrees apart at the start of November, but that will shrink to around 2.3 degrees apart by the end of the month.
That's quite
as
good.
They head towards the conjunction, the Great Conjunction next month, of course.
Yeah, that'll be quite good, actually. I haven't actually... I don't think I've seen a Jupiter and Saturn conjunction before, so this will be new for me. I think I may have missed a previous good one, so...
Well, the closest because they're closest on the 21st of December, if I remember correctly, and they're about 6 arc minutes apart. And the last time they were that separation was July 1623. So I'm surprised you haven't seen it that close before.
You probably caught that one though, didn't you?
Very funny. So that's something to look forward to as they sort of move towards the evening twilight, because they have been really low, haven't they? I know it's said that
Forever.
it's forever. Yeah, it's said that you should still observe them even though they're very low, but it's tricky because you've got the effects of seeing kicking in.
You have, but
and you've also got the effects of atmospheric dispersion, which spreads their colour a little bit as well.
it's true. I have slightly less sympathy for you, though, because you've got a great western horizon. I have a 15-minute window which Jupiter and Saturn, they pass through the gaps in the houses that I can observe, and it's slightly earlier each evening. So I have a very, very short time window to observe it.
More than enough.
It's not more than enough. It's frequently cloudy just at the crucial bit. Oh, dear.
Okay.
Well, moving out to the ice giants, Uranus and Neptune are nicely on display now. Uranus was at opposition on Halloween, October 31st.
Yep.
And it'll remain very easy to see in Aries over the next few months. It's easy to identify in binoculars because it's got a distinctive greenish colour, and telescopes will show you a small greenish disc, which is fun. And I think a little project I've tried, now I've got my new 12-inch Newtonian up and running, Pete, is I've been trying to see how many of the satellites I can spot with the larger telescope. Because I think, am I right in saying you've managed to image them, a lot of the moons, with a smaller telescope?
Yeah, they're not too difficult to image at all. I think the big problem I have with Uranus, because, as you know, well, we're both old school, we sort of use manual methods to locate, is that it's actually in quite a tricky part of the sky to locate at the moment because there's nothing bright around it.
No.
So you've got to sort of work out a line where you can pick it up. And the best way I've found to do that at the moment is to use the bright orange star in Cetus Mencar, which is Alpha Ceti, and Sheraton, which is Beta Arietis. So you've got that little bent line, which is the most identifiable part of Aries. It's the middle star of the bent line. So if you go between that Sheraton and Mencar, about halfway along that, well, actually, it's about 60% of the way along that line, starting at Mencar, if you want to be picky about it. That's where Uranus is. And as you say, if you use binoculars, I struggle, I must admit, to see any colour with binoculars. I have to use a telescope to actually pick out that colour.
Yeah, I've struggled to see colour properly, convincingly with binoculars. Not with my finder scope. For some reason, I can tell it's slightly off colour. It's perhaps not green, but it's certainly something that's different. It's not stellar.
Okay.
In my 10x50 finder scope, I tend to do when I'm finding it. I tend to do setting circles to Mencar and then rotate to Uranus after that. But it takes a few goes. I don't mind admitting it's not straightforward.
No, it isn't at all. Well, actually, Neptune, which is the next planet out and the furthest planet in the solar system, or the furthest of the main planets in the solar system, we should say, is pretty well placed as well. And that's just to the east of Phi Aquarii. And that's actually a lot easier to find because of its proximity to Phi. Even though Neptune is not a naked eye planet. I mean, we say Uranus is a naked eye planet, but it's a tricky naked eye planet, isn't it? You need really dark skies.
I've never seen it with the naked eye. I don't think I've been in a sky dark enough.
Okay.
I think as well the problem, there would be any stars of equivalent brightness or slightly brighter nearby in the immediate vicinity. You could see those and be convinced you've seen it.
Which there are some.
Yeah.
So it is tricky. Yeah, but Neptune, you've got no chance because it's Mag 7.8. So you need at least binoculars to see that. But as I say, its proximity to Phi is quite useful. There's a couple of stars just to the east of Phi, which sort of form a nice pointed or sideways pointing isosceles triangle with Phi at the point of the isosceles triangle. And they can be used as the sort of static background pattern against which you can see Neptune. So that's one way to get that. But the amazing thing about Neptune, especially if you're an imager, is that it's quite easy to see its brightest moon, Triton.
Yes, it's actually not too difficult to pick it up with a telescope either. I've seen it fairly easily with my 8-inch reflector. I've not turned the 12-inch onto it yet, but I imagine it will be fairly straightforward to see it. It's not a difficult satellite 'cause it's quite bright and icy.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, shall we move on to the special events? Because we have a couple. If we start off with the 5th of November, starting just after 01 UT, there's a 82% lit waning gibbous moon that will begin to move in front of the southern edge of the open cluster M35 in Gemini. That'll be quite pretty.
Yes, it will. I mean, the moon's light will drown out the faint cluster stars, of course, but if you have a telescope and you look at the waning gibbous moon, you should be able to see it as it heads over the cluster. It's a beautiful cluster, M35, some nice, well-defined stars in there. So look very carefully, and you may be able to see the cluster there. And if you can, you'll see a number of occultations, lunar occultations, as the cluster stars begin to get hidden by the moon's disk.
Yes, so that'll be a nice thing to watch out for. On the 11th, this is quite an interesting event. It involves dwarf planet Pluto, which is magnitude 14.1, but it is conveniently positioned next to giant planet Jupiter. In fact, on the evening of the 11th, they are just 42 arc minutes apart. So if you have access to a larger telescope and you've never seen Pluto before, you can use Jupiter to find it. This will be quite a good way of doing it, and a nice photo opportunity as well.
I was going to say, good luck with that visually. Actually 14.1 is not too difficult to get down to with a camera. The big problem will be the low altitude of the pair.
Yeah.
So you've got the atmospheric murk which gets in the way and it sort of blocks your view. But the best way to do it with a camera is to use a reasonably narrow field of view. I mean, 42 arc minutes is, what's that? It's just as 1 1/3 times the apparent size of the moon. So if you've got a setup which can get the whole of the moon in, plus a little bit around the outside, then if you point it to Jupiter, you should be able to get Jupiter and Pluto in the same field of view. But the trick is to take photographs over as many clear nights as you get and then compare them. And if you see a little really tiny faint dot moving, then that could well be dwarf planet Pluto. But one word of caution there, if you're imaging, is to make sure you take dark frames and subtract those from the light frames, because if you don't do that, you'll end up with little hot pixels in the pictures, which are very easy to identify as planets or asteroids. So just make sure you calibrate your frames properly.
Yes.
Okay, so on the 12th, we have the northern Taurid meteor shower reaching its peak, and that has the astonishing ZHR of 5 meteors per hour. Now, that doesn't sound particularly exciting, but the thing about the northern Taurids and the southern Taurids, which peaks in October, is the fact that the peaks are broad, so the peak period lasts for several days, and there have been bright events associated with the northern Taurids in the past.
Yes, but as you say, it's not going to produce many meteors, but worth watching out for. I think it's I've only dimly aware of it as a meteor shower, and I think that's because it's completely overshadowed by the annual Leonid meteor shower, which reaches its peak on the 17th of November. And this is going to be quite a good one because the moon is just 2 days old, so it'll be out of the way. So it looks like, if providing the skies are clear, it'll be a good opportunity to observe the Leonid meteor shower this year.
Yes, it will. I mean, the Leonids is a funny shower, because people get all excited about it because it has in the past produced storm-level events, but they tend to occur with a periodicity of 33 years. And at the moment, we're right in the middle of that 33-year period. So the ZHR is probably going to be around the 15 meteor per hour mark, which isn't spectacular. And the other problem with the Leonids is that the meteors are really fast.
Yeah.
I think it's the fastest shower in the annual calendar. So if you're trying to take photographs of Leonids, they can be quite tricky because they zip through your field of view very, very quickly. So you need to be aware of that. It's also worth noting, actually, the night before the Leonids reaches its peak on the 16th of November, Mars, because Mars has been moving against the background stars. And on the 16th of November, at magnitude minus 1.6, it reaches what's known as a stationary point, where it appears to stop moving in its apparent direction to the west, as it is at the moment, and then it will reverse direction, so it starts moving to the east again against the background stars.
Yeah, it's not easy to follow, though, is it? Unless you've been taking pictures of it against the background stars.
Pictures are probably the best way to do it, because it reveals if you've been doing it over a long enough period, you will reveal that Mars has been moving to the east, then it reverses direction, starts to move to the west, and then it reverses direction to move to the east again, and it forms what's known as a retrograde loop in the sky, which is due to the Earth, the faster orbital motion of the Earth overtaking Mars. So it creates this weird sort of slightly backward movement and then restoring the movement again.
Yes.
Okay. Well, let's carry on then to the 22nd. We've got that famous clair-obscur effect, or effects, I should say, which produces the lunar X and the lunar V on the terminator of the moon, the two giant letters which look like X's, or X and a V. But that occurs in daylight at 1400 UT, so you need to get out and look at the moon with your telescope during the day. At least you can see what you're doing, but of course it makes the contrast a little harder. But later, during darkness, if you use a high magnification on the crater Albategnius, you should be able to see another clair-obscur effect, which is known as the face in Albategnius, and that's where the shadow of the crater rim falls on the crater's floor, and it creates the profile of a human face. It's quite striking, that. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
I've seen it in images. I've never actually seen it in real life, so I might give that a look. And as you say, it really does look like a face in profile. So it'd be nice to see that in real life, as it were. Sticking with the moon, the full moon that occurs on the 30th occurs when the moon is at apogee. This is when it's at its furthest point in its orbit. In other words, the moon will be a little bit fainter and a little bit smaller than it usually is. So are you going to suggest we call this the micromoon rather than a supermoon?
It's actually known as a micromoon, but because it doesn't get the same press that the so-called supermoon gets, nobody pays it any attention. So,
and rightly so.
This is one to balance the books. Let's make a lot of fuss over the micromoon. But of course, in reality, it'll look hardly any different from any other regular full moon. So
yes, that's right.
Just a regular full moon. Okay, so let's finish off by looking at the stars then. So if we face south early in the evening, we're presented with the faint watery constellations of autumn. And many of these are large and indistinct, but navigational assistance is provided by a large asterism called the Great Square of Pegasus. And it's not particularly bright, is it, the Great Square?
No, it's not. But do you know, I have a great affection for the Square of Pegasus because when I was first getting into astronomy when I was a kid, I had Patrick's book of Introduction to Astronomy, a little pocket book, and it was one of the first constellations after the Plough and Orion that I identified. It was the first, what I thought of as a non-trivial constellation. So I always associate it with beginning of amateur astronomy for me, because that was the first constellation I looked at. And then, of course, I went after M31 with my small telescope at the time. So I have great affection for the Square of Pegasus, Pete.
Okay, well, that's fair enough. Okay, well, if you look south of the Great Square, you'll see another geometric shape. That's the circlet, which is a faint, it is pretty faint,
it's very
asterism
faint,
of stars, but it does stand out quite well, and that represents the western fish of Pisces, the fish, which is a pair of fish tied together by a cord. Okay, there's some strange things up there. But southwest sits the sprawling form of Aquarius, the water bearer. And the most recognizable pattern here is a small group of four stars arranged like the spokes of a three-pronged steering wheel. And that's an asterism known as the water jar. The main form of Aquarius sits southwest of the water jar, and it contains a couple of pretty iconic deep sky objects, it has to be said. So you've got the Saturn Nebula, NGC 7009, which looks like a faint version of Saturn. Have you ever looked at that with a naked eye?
I've not looked at it. Well, I've turned the telescope onto it. Yeah, I have, and you can see the extensions in an 8-inch telescope. I think the great things planetary nebulae, because most of them do have quite a high surface brightness. So even with a smaller telescope, you could see them and see some vague structure, even if it's not the kind of structure you get in high resolution photography. And the Saturn Nebula is one of those that kind of does look like its name, which is quite unusual in astronomy. So I think it's quite a good one to go for.
It is. It's quite striking. Yeah, it's interesting what you said there about the surface brightness, because NGC 7293, which is also known as the Helix Nebula, has an incredibly low surface brightness.
Yes, except that one.
Yeah, except that one. And that's because it's the closest planetary nebula to Earth. And it's huge. It's got an apparent diameter of 25 arc minutes.
But many of the other ones that we quite like the Ring Nebula, the Dumbbell Nebula, those are all pretty bright. But this one is, as you say, much closer. 25 arc minutes. That's actually quite a size of the sky.
That's a real exception with planetary nebulae. A lot of them are pretty small, aren't they? Pretty tiny.
Yes.
And of course, it messes everything up because this is listed as magnitude plus 7.6, and that's an integrated magnitude. So that's if you took all the light and you squished it down to the size of a star. But of course you can't do that. So it has its actual brightness is spread over an area in the sky which has a diameter of 25 arc minutes, and that's why it appears to have this really low surface brightness. I don't think I've ever seen it visually, I have to be honest.
No, I haven't either. It's one of those. I haven't seen lots and lots of deep sky objects, and this is one that hasn't ever made it onto my observing list because it's quite difficult to see visually, as you say, with the low surface brightness.
Okay. Well, southwest of Aquarius, we come to Capricornus, the sea goat, whatever that is. We termed a different term for that, didn't we? Called it a mergoat.
A mergoat.
I think it's a
squash triangle.
That's right. It's the down-pointing triangle, which looks a bit like a misshapen sandwich. I think the mythology, there are various stories, and one which is quite nice is that Pan, or the god Pan, which had a goat form, jumped into the water to escape a monster which was coming his way. And he was so startled, and it happened so quickly, that he didn't have time to do a full transformation into an aquatic creature. So only half of him ended up as a fish. So
right.
That's why he turned into a sea goat. It sounds plausible.
Well, yes, it might if you're drinking the right stuff. I suppose it might. Yes, Capricornus does contain the infamous globular cluster M30, and it's infamous because in March, if the weather is good and the moon's not in the way, it's possible to see the entire Messier catalogue in one night, except for this globular cluster. And I have actually seen it once from north. I think when we were up in Kielder that time, Pete, I managed to see it then. But that's the only view I've ever had of it.
It's not a bad globular, to be honest, but it's sort of hated because it sort of causes that issue with the Messier marathon. Okay, well, east of Aquarius and south of Pisces, we've got Cetus, the whale or sea monster, and the most obvious shape here is the misshapen pentagon representing the creature's head. And that appears east of the star marking the knot in that cord which ties together those two fish in Pisces, which is a star known as Alresha. The second brightest star in Cetus is Menkar, and that's part of that misshapen pentagon, and it's definitely orange in colour. But the brightest star is Deneb Katos, and that can be found by extending the eastern side of the Great Square of Pegasus to the south. And if you do that, you'll eventually arrive at this star Deneb Katos, which is Beta Cetus, also known as Difter, which means frog.
Right. It's got a few interesting names.
Yes. Okay, well, there are a number of galaxies worth mentioning in this part of the sky. We've got M31, which you mentioned earlier on, which is the Andromeda Galaxy, of course, which is an object visible to the naked eye given reasonably dark skies. And it's the closest large neighbour to the Milky Way galaxy at around 2.5 million light years. And can you see that from Leicester, because you're in the city, aren't you?
I'm not in the city. It's a 45-minute walk away from the city. I've never seen it with the naked eye, but well, a telescopic view, even in dark skies, is always quite disappointing because all you're ever looking at is the core.
Yes.
But if you look at it with binoculars or through the finder scope on the telescope, you do get quite a nice view of it, actually. Because a lot of the lighting in Leicester has been replaced with white lights that shine down properly. So I think this has increased the limiting magnitude so that it is easier to see these deep sky objects now.
Okay. Well, in Pisces, we've got a much fainter galaxy known as M77, which is a face-on spiral, which lies close to the star Eta Piscium, which makes it easy to find. But the one I would like to just highlight quickly is NGC 253, which is in the constellation of Sculptor. Bet you didn't expect that one. But it's known as the Silver Dollar Galaxy, and it's actually pretty good. You know, if you've got a good southern part of the sky, it's worth looking that one up because it's quite impressive.
I've never seen it, actually. I'm not even sure I'd ever heard of it until you mentioned it today, Pete.
Well, from where I used to live, I had to cut the hedge at the end of the garden to actually get a view of it. And when I did, I managed to get a photograph of it, and I was astonished how good it is actually from the UK. So it's definitely worth having a go for. It sits south of Deneb Katos, so if that's already low for you, then you might struggle a bit, but it's definitely worth trying to get a view of it.
Right. Well, there's lots of nice things there in the night sky. I wish everyone clear skies. Let's hope to get a look at some of the things this month. Thanks, Pete.
Thanks, Paul.